The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
So we're here today on Titans of Nuclear with Jeremy Gordon, who's the director of Fluent in Energy and a communications professional that I've known for a while in the nuclear industry. Jeremy, welcome.
Oh, hi, Brett. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be a titan of nuclear in this grand project that you've been undertaking for a long time. Great to be part of it now.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you won't be a titan until the end of the episode, but we'll assume it goes there.
If you could kick me off halfway through.
Yeah. No, I was so excited to have you on the show. I mean, I've known you for years, and I remember we, got lunch together. And where was it? Was that in France or?
No, that was in London.
That was in London. But you wouldn't. But we were having escargot or something. You wouldn't eat escargot. Was that it?
It was a really nice French restaurant, and they were so proud of their snails. And I was just like, no, I'm not interested.
I couldn't believe it. I wanted to try it. I'd never tried it before. It was like on the menu as their recommended appetizer, and you're like, nope,
not interested. No, and the guy was so offended.
No. Oh, okay, well, we got past that part, and then we got chatting about the nuclear industry. And you were at World Nuclear Association at the time, is that right? Or where were you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, World Nuclear Association. I was kind of in a management team and working on their Harmony program at that time.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. But before we get there, I just want to learn a little bit more about you. I'm not even sure I had the full opportunity to learn about your history, and this is the most exciting part of this job for me. So tell me, where'd you grow up and what got you into energy?
Okay, well, I mean, I grew up where I live now, which is in the suburbs of London, fairly ordinary, kind of, reasonably comfortable life.
And which suburbs and how is London structured in terms of suburbs? Do they have different characters? And is it like the east, the west? How do you break that out for us?
London is, London is a collection of villages that all grew together. Right, so they do each area has its own character. And I'm kind of out. I live in Kingston, and that is on the River Thames, and it grew up around a bridge. So like, X amount of years ago, it was the only place you could get across the river, apart from using a boat, other than London Bridge. And it grew up around a kind of a market. And just the next door down the river is Hampton Court Palace. And so the royals were always coming and going, and Kingston grew up around that as a kind of a royal market. So it's got this kind of nice history. It's kind of leafy. And because the river comes down there aren't very many big roads. And it didn't really grow up and get overdeveloped. So it's quite, people would say it's kind of a leafy middle class kind of place. So it's got its own character. Everywhere has its own kind of pros and cons.
Yeah, and in the place that you grew up, what do most people end up doing? Do they go to college? What do they study? Tell me about your friends. Like, where did they all end up?
Well, they all worked in video games, actually. Most of my friends who I went through college with, we were studying physics, computers, and maths. That's what we tend to do for our A levels when we were kind of 16, 17, 18. I didn't really want to do maths, but they told me I had to do it if I wanted to do physics, which I was interested in. So I wanted to be a video game programmer because I'd become interested in computers and programming at home, just messing around. And a few of them managed to get connections at video game companies. There are quite a few in the southeast of England. And they managed to get themselves jobs on the basis of no experience and just blagging ability. So there's that's what we were interested in at that time.
And then what did you go on to do?
Well, I started out on that route. I got myself a degree in artificial intelligence, and which was, science fiction in those days.
Yeah.
Now it's for real, right? But that was kind of 97 to 2000. I did that, and it was a bit more rudimentary. But I wanted to work in video games and make the enemies more realistic, make them like hold a grudge against you, and make them change tactics, make them kind of play dirty and things like that.
And that's kind of the way the industry has been heading too. I mean, at least in terms of visuals and the physics engines behind these games, it's just unbelievable.
It's all absolutely standard now. Yeah. So I worked in it when that was kind of, well, it was becoming standard. I wasn't really very good at it though, because I mean, it is very, very highly technical. And although I get the broad strokes of it, I understand the reasons why we need the technical aspects. I wasn't particularly good at actually implementing them in like a properly robust sort of way. So that didn't work out for me. And I got basically kicked out. So I got sacked from that. And then I didn't really know what to do. But then I was super fortunate to get an offer of some casual work on a newspaper, on the Daily Mail weekend magazine, which as kind of a friend of a friend, the father worked there. He said, look, I need somebody to fill a gap. Yeah, one of your friends interested. I was going, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And that's like real piece of privilege to get that. But once I was sort of working with words, I found I'm good at this. I can do this. And this kind of makes sense to me. So I kind of got on an editorial path after that.
Cool. And what type of stuff do you write about?
Well, I mean, in those days, it was really simple work, doing the TV listings, basically, for this big magazine full of TV listings. So it's just copy fitting to be the right length and getting stuff to fit on the page and just basic work like that. But it proved to me that I could do it.
Yeah. And
then after that, I still needed a proper job and I didn't know which direction to go. So, but I was thinking, okay, let's look at editorial work. And I applied for a job and it said assistant editor on a technical title. I was like, okay, well, let's have a look. I'm a semi-technical guy. Let's try. And it turned out to be Nuclear Engineering International magazine.
Cool.
And that was when I randomly started working in nuclear.
So cool. And who owned Nuclear, that magazine? What's the structure of that?
Okay, so that's it's a very long-running publication. It's been going like more than 50 years.
Yeah, the website looks like
it. Yeah, does a bit. So, that is just one of 100 magazines owned by the same company.
Yeah.
And the way that industry works is that publishing company will churn out those magazines and they have a very kind of predictable base of subscribers. And then after a while, they'll kind of cut costs a little bit, make the company worth more, sell it to somebody else, and then that will repeat. It seems to repeat like every 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an ongoing kind of churn.
Yeah, it's like one of those, they aggregate a bunch of niche audiences that they know will have a high retention rate, but they don't have to compete against like the broad public.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, I enjoyed working there.
And what exactly did you do for them?
Well, as the assistant editor, I was support to the editor. There was only 2 of us producing, I don't know, like 38 pages of pretty dense material about nuclear engineering on a monthly basis. So if you think about it, you've got to produce like a page a day. That's more than 1,000 words a day. And
this was online at the time, or was this strictly a print publication?
It was print, but there was a bit of a website.
Yeah,
a little bit neglected. Not much to it. Not much of a business around that like it is now, because this was 2004. So we were doing everything. We were writing some features ourselves, writing quite a lot of news in those days, 6 or 8 pages of news a month. But mainly the content came from the industry itself and the engineers actually doing the work, of the scientists who are out there researching stuff. So we would spend a lot of time going to conferences, meeting people, hearing what they're doing. And when we found something which we reckon would be interesting for the audience, we would get them to write an article for us and then edit that, put it all together. Right. So it was a really nice job to visit power plants, to meet engineers, to see how things work. And as a very naive kind of, an outsider without any real knowledge of nuclear, without any deep knowledge of physics, have these guys patiently explaining everything. It's a great place to learn.
Yep. And then tell me, like, at what point did you start feeling pretty confident in like your understanding of the technology?
I kind of want to say never.
Yeah. Okay, that's the right answer. That's the right answer. Yeah.
I'm definitely on this curve, where you feel quite confident and you realize you know nothing. And I'm still heading down further on that. Happy to leave the technical things to the technical experts and always follow their lead. But I mean, it took about 2 years to have read and written about every topic that was out there, every country, every aspect of the industry, every part of the fuel cycle, figure out what is a safety issue, what is a real issue, and what's not. So it took about 2 years. A magazine is a great place to do it because it has an annual kind of editorial cycle. Yep. So you're guaranteed to look at every single aspect during that. So once I've seen them all 2 or 3 times, I just like to know what was going on.
Yep. Yeah. So how long did you do that for? And then when did you switch to your next role?
Yeah, it was about 2.5 years. And sort of during that time, I made quite a lot of contacts around the place.
Yeah.
And I began to also feel that the industry could be doing better in its communication.
Sure.
Because I joined as just a naive, ordinary person with the same hang-ups about nuclear as everybody else, not very confident in it, wanting to be reassured that it's being done properly and I can trust these organizations. And through the course of meeting people and seeing things with my own eyes, I realized, well, actually, this is not the kind of thing we need to be getting rid of. We need more of this.
Yeah.
It actually works pretty good. And what I thought was a big problem, not really big problems. We do know what to do. What's the problem with us doing some more of this? I began to personally become pro-nuclear, basically.
Yeah.
Through that as an education. And among the people that I was kind of making contact with, seeing around, were some people from the World Nuclear Association, in particular Ian Hoare-Lacy, who's kind of a legendary guy. I'm not sure if you've spoken to him yet.
I haven't come across him yet, no.
He's probably the most prolific nuclear communicator has ever lived, wow. or perhaps that ever will.
All right, we'll have to make a note to get a hold of him.
Yeah. I think you need this guy. Okay. Because he basically pretty much single-handedly had written these long information papers about every topic that you can imagine in the nuclear business, every country, every technology, every issue, every single thing, and kept them meticulously up to date, as meticulous as one human can maintain like 200 long documents. So, he's a very knowledgeable guy, and he was using that base of information. They were just providing talking points for everybody who's out there who wants to talk about nuclear. So a base of understanding that supports, more message-based communication or more story-based. You provide a really good layer of facts for everybody. It's still underlying a lot of what you see out there today. Because if you just Google nuclear Bulgaria, because you want to know what's going on in Bulgaria, you'll find it, and you'll pretty quickly find you're reading his stuff.
Oh, anyway, where's he from? Which country?
He's Australian.
Okay, all right. I know exactly who
you must have known.
I know. Okay, now I know. Yeah, I thought maybe you were talking about someone from the UK or something. Now I know exactly. Yeah, he wrote all of those, those those just like knowledge pages that sit on, world.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Got it.
So he was doing that, and he was looking for somebody to replace him, to kind of take over, kind of pass on the baton, or what have you. And he thought that I maybe could do that. So, we were talking to each other, and he realized, oh, this guy's pro-nuclear. He can read and write about it without getting the details wrong. So, let's give him a try. So I ended up working at World Nuclear Association with Ian Hoare-Lacy, working on those papers for a little while. That lasted a few months before my role at WNA really began, when I was asked to create a new news service for them. And the result of that is World Nuclear News,
Cool.
which we set up in 2007.
Tell me about the process. How do you set it up? How do you get your content coming in? What's the technology? Tell me all the challenges.
Well, what I actually realized when I was on the magazine, what I realized is that there's a huge demand for information about nuclear, especially when anything is seems to be perhaps is going wrong. People want answers and they want information. And at that time, the internet had become decent enough that companies did have websites, and they did have press releases on them, and they did have pictures. And the information was actually out there. And it was possible, I think, it's what I realized, it was possible to actually get the information together quite quickly. But sort of nobody was doing that. And it was still, there was no social media for sharing in those days, right? They hadn't really begun. Facebook hadn't begun yet, really. So what I realized is, well, if we just make that our job, we find the information about what's happening from the company press releases, the organization press releases, and what we already know, because we're the World Nuclear Association, so we know a lot. And we source pictures and put it on a website. This is going to be valuable, useful, it's going to be important. It's going to be a good service for our members, a good service for anyone who happens to be interested in nuclear, with the objective that we could get more people interested in nuclear. And we wanted to for it to organically grow, so that, the industry is happy reading about itself, because you also have to remember that parts of the industry don't understand each other's technology or what's going on or why.
Yeah.
In different countries or with different parts of the fuel cycle, they don't necessarily understand each other. So we help that understanding, and we help even, like, say, a fellow like you, interested in nuclear but starts out not knowing about it. Well, here's a starting place. You can read what's going on and why in plain English, with links to find out more. And that was the crux of World Nuclear News in those days.
Yeah.
So we began doing that. It was me and one other guy, Warwick Pipe, and we were writing 1 or 2 stories a day each, and just absolutely cranking that out on simple website, really basic. We just used the most simple website we could do to actually launch.
And what about building up a viewer base? Did that happen organically, or did you have some sort of like email lists that came with World Nuclear Association?
Yeah, we had a whole load of contacts that came with the association, and they had a project to get everybody's business cards and put everybody in.
And how big is that database? How many people did you guys have, and how many people would view the content?
Well, I'm a bit out of date now, because I haven't been there for a few years, but we had like about 25,000 getting the email. It was sort of gradually growing. A fewer get the daily email, more get the weekly email. And you would get tens of thousands perhaps on a really big story.
Yeah,
it really went through the roof for Fukushima. But a normal story will have kind of a normal industry audience, but the potential is there to scale to magnificent levels of viewership.
Yep. And tell me about Fukushima. When you guys first started reporting on it, I still always like to track down, like, what did people think at the time? Because, in hindsight, and this is, from my perspective, I only came into the industry a few years ago. We already knew there were no deaths. It seemed like the industry really fumbled on, instead of using, Fukushima as a reason to kind of like calm everyone down, it went the opposite direction. So what was it like at the time reporting on it?
It was pretty scary, to be honest. Well, I mean, by that time, so let's put it in the context of what I was doing. So we launched World Nuclear News 2007. So by 2011, it was well established, much better website, good, good brand recognition, and bigger email sort of following. And we had a really good routine. We knew all the original sources to get information all over the world, and using the W&A resources, the people inside the office, which is super international. We had a Japanese secondee working there, so we were instantly kind of able to get a handle on what was going on. And we were also working on projects to connect the communicators of the world as well, because they're kind of operating on their own, answering questions about different events and things.
Yeah.
But W&A is a really central position. So it formed a really nice synergy that what we do every day on the news, or what I was doing every day on the news, and they still do now, is here's something is going on, research what's happening, get the facts together and written down in plain English. It's perfect to support the whole industry. And it means that the right contacts all over the world. So we really, really relied on that. I mean, I remember the morning of the accident, I was, not out of bed, but my wife said, like, oh my God, there's been a huge earthquake in Japan. And, in the news, natural disaster is always news.
Yeah.
Until that day, it had always been good news, because we could always write, the nuclear reactors absolutely sailed through this problem.
Yeah.
Everyone reported it was fine. Really no story, but just put it there. Include that in the body of knowledge that they sail through these incidents. And in fact, on the 10th of March, the day before the big earthquake, we'd written a little story like that. There had been an earthquake. I can't remember the magnitude, 4, 5, 6,
Right.
Nothing spectacular. And we'd mentioned Fukushima, Daiichi, and Daini had got through it no problem. But then that day was different. So what did we do? We the first thing I did was try to get some data, and you always go to the Geologic Survey websites of the world, especially the US one is really good.
Yeah.
It's kind of naturally is taking the global view of that, and the Japanese one also very good. So sort of share that information, and we tried to do that. So, okay, this has definitely happened. This is the location. Scan the company websites for whatever status they put out, but it was nothing. But we could see from the pictures on the TV, it was super serious. So just hurried into the office, and we were working on gathering the information. But it wasn't until like 11:30 in the morning that we realized the scale of it, what had truly happened. And I always remember this moment where we're hearing that the diesels at the plant are not working.
Yeah.
Well, we've heard before, occasionally a diesel won't start. They've got like 8 diesels or something. It's happened before that one of them didn't start, and everyone, that's not supposed to happen. That's a problem. You look into that and why. But that's not really a problem, because you don't need every single one. And then we hear, no, actually, none of them are working. And we're looking at each other. What on earth can cause it? How can none of them be working? This is just, and then we our jaws drop. The tsunami.
Yeah.
So at that moment, when we realized the trouble we were in, so we swung into a kind of emergency response configuration at that time. Yeah, it was really a blood running cold moment.
Yeah.
Especially because the realization was that, this had all occurred hours ago and we've only just figured it out.
Yeah. And then even though it still did take 3 days until there was significant core damage or until the roof blew off, right?
Yeah, it was a good 24 hours, at least before Unit 1 had that explosion. And then it just kept rumbling on it got worse every day for a week, basically. It got worse and worse and worse and worse.
And did the big news companies like CNN, did they reach out to you guys to source people? Because they've got nuclear people on,
Yeah, they did. The phones were going absolutely mental.
Yeah.
So I was pretty much the press officer at that time as well, which worked nicely with my role on the news, because generally whatever issue would come up, I would have already looked at it and have kind of an idea of, an understanding of it. And journalists don't generally want a comment from somebody like the WNA, because it's obviously a promotional organization.
Right.
It's not directly involved in whatever issue.
Right.
So
they probably just want you to route them to somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah, they want some context or get a bit closer to an original source. So it was quite a good role as press officer to help them understand what's really happening, what's for real, what's not for real. So that was really busy. And Ian Hore-Lacy, he did about like 200 interviews literally in like 2 days. It was absolutely non-stop.
Wow.
So we absolutely were like crazy. It's kind of a war effort to keep up with the information.
Yeah.
What worked really, really well for us is that we were very well practiced in our communication, because we were a news organization publishing every day.
Mm-hmm.
We had in-house resources who understood how power plants work and can help us read Japanese. And we had the contacts all over the world, particularly in the Japan Atomic Industrial Forum, which is like the Japanese version of NEI.
Okay, got it.
And it was really them that had the best information on the status. So we were relaying their information and trying to contextualize it, trying to keep up with that most of the time.
And what about like technical experts? Did you guys hunt down any boiling water reactor experts? It was a boiling water reactor, right? And does that mean that was GE's design, or?
Yeah, it was a GE design, boiling water reactor. It doesn't matter like that much. From our point of view, it didn't matter that much. But one of the first things I did after the first explosion, I watched that from my dining room table. It's like, okay, I'm coming into the office. Yeah. We had gone to bed the night before thinking, okay, it's probably going to be over in the morning. But then obviously it was the opposite. Going into London on the train, I just rang up everybody I knew who knew about BWRs.
Right. Because I feel like the most important thing to communicate to the world in that moment is that, like, hey, the explosion was not a nuclear explosion; it was a hydrogen explosion, right? Because I mean that matters, right? And that's like I think people were probably thinking at the time Chernobyl, and that was more of like a nuclear / steam explosion that blew apart the reactor. And so it's probably important to communicate to people that can't happen in a boiling water reactor, and that it's, just some other chemical explosion that is just, a result of the accident sequence, but isn't one that would, project nuclear material outward like the Chernobyl situation would.
Yeah, right. I mean, and some people might actually be concerned it's like a nuclear explosion, like a
right. And that's what's important to communicate.
That's like number one, rule that out. Number two, say, yeah, this is a hydrogen explosion. And we were very fortunate in the UK. It just so happened that Malcolm Grimston, who I think you've spoken to.
Oh, yeah. Huge influence on me. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like live on TV on Sky News at that moment. And they cut to him and go, well, Mr. Grimston, well, what do you make of this? And straight off, he said, this is a hydrogen explosion. This is this is part of, this is an implication of damage to the reactor core, but this is not the reactor core exploding, and calm the situation down slightly.
Yeah, thank God for that guy.
But I mean, the general feeling that I had was that any radiological release was like just extremely bad news from a PR point of view. It's just kind of a Rubicon that you cross if you have to vent the reactor.
Isn't that the problem with the industry overall? Is that's how we've indoctrinated the world to be afraid of nuclear, is by treating it as if any radiological release is a hazard. Because every single time I breathe, I'm breathing out 1 billion radioactive carbon-14 atoms. And it's like the potassium in my body. Every person I walk near, 500 gamma rays per second, blasting them with literally just by walking by somebody. So isn't that the problem, that we have to figure out a way to communicate that that magnitude matters, quantity of toxin matters? People can see it in their everyday life. You don't hold your mouth up to an exhaust pipe, because
Right.
that'll cause problems. When you walk by one, you kind of hold your nose a little bit because you're a little further away and it's a little bit more dilute. And then if you're a mile away from the closest car, you don't worry about the exhaust pipe, just because, it's you're still breathing in atoms from it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, it still reaches you.
Point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've explained it really well. So I think it is a kind of internalized radiophobia.
Yeah.
We've actually internalized that ourselves, and that is the way I saw it. If that happens, this event is of a completely different character
in terms of psychological perception.
Yeah, the seriousness of it just goes way up. Yeah.
Okay, so and then all right, so that's the big event. Obviously, were there any other big events or any other really newsworthy things that have happened since that kind of in this position that you've seen people kind of really gravitate on towards? Anything with Vogel or anything else that people really kind of drew their attention or interest into the industry? Or is that it pretty much?
Yeah, well, that is the big news event of all. From our sort of global perspective, we weren't particularly sort of invested in the story of Vogel or the saga of Hinckley or of Olkiluoto. I mean, these are all sort of, let's say, bad news stories. Unfortunately, we didn't get overly invested in those. We just would continue to cover and to monitor them.
Any good news stories? Any new technologies that came out of China, or Russia, or lead fast anything like that was worth?
Well, yeah, the big sort of development is the small reactors, isn't it? And it kind of, we saw kind of there was a swelling of interest around thorium, and there's the whole idea that you can do nuclear in a better way. The thorium, is a bit of a red herring, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
think the whole concept of doing nuclear in a better way is a bit of a red herring, because what it does is it reinforces this underlying, negative sentiment towards the old way of doing things. But it's the old way of doing things was so great. I keep coming back to 1968 to 1973 in America. We built 50 plants that were the cheapest, fastest, cleanest source of power the world has ever seen. And that was the old way. That was when everything was a first of a kind. And it's I hate how we disparage these concepts now, because we've proven that nuclear can rise to the global scale that we need it to for energy prosperity, for climate reasons, for air pollution, for water. We have the historical evidence, and yet we continue to say, oh no, it has to be some fundamentally new way if it's going to work.
Well, I mean, people inherently like new things, don't they? Anything that has a kind of a new label on it is automatically interesting. And it's a natural feature of planet Earth that new, young things usually are better than what they replace. This is what we see all the time. So it's natural to think something new is going to be better. But I think the kind of flip side is, it comes back to the big communication problem, doesn't it? It's really that the industry has, let's just say the whole sector has let its reputation become so tarnished that it, as it is, even it is not very happy with itself.
Yeah, exactly. I know, it's so funny because over the years I've started to criticize the industry more and more, and that's only because the industry rewards me for doing so. They keep telling me, yes, tell us, like, it's like,
Please,
like self-punishment. Yes, you're right. Like, tell us we're bad so we can like rally up the internal support to make the changes that we need. Like, shame us. They tell me to shame them.
That's so it. I'm coming to believe that the industry can only really be helped by people who are actually coming from the outside perspective, right? And it's a difficult life for those people to not be accepted by industry. Probably they don't have a position where they can be funded by it.
Right.
Yet they're dedicating their time to trying to help it. Yet always being rejected. It's a nightmare. There's a few of us in this sort of position.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 or 5 organizations just as you described. But it's so funny because they're very warmly received by individuals throughout the industry, individuals in high places of power as well, like in social scenes, in just like like informally, very highly praised. People are very grateful for what they're doing, but the formal structures in place, it's like, like a big utility can't fund an organization that is criticizing that big utility.
Yeah, and they have to, beg for money and exist on a shoestring permanently, on the edge of actually closing down. And we see people have to quit what they're doing to to take a regular job or something.
Yet some remain gluttons for punishment. Why do you think that is? And let me ask, in your context as well, you kind of got, haphazardly found the industry, and it's not always, it's not always the friendliest thing to mention amongst your social circles and stuff. How come you've stuck with it all these years? You could have written technically about anything. How come you stayed with the nuclear industry?
I really found it very rewarding and constantly interesting, and there's so many unsolved challenges. And I had a good time working on the magazine. There was lots of travel and seeing stuff. There's a lot of learning all the time. And working at WNA was the same. It's super rewarding. It's really just privileged and lucky to travel a lot, meet tons of amazing people, so much smarter than me, and actually have a role in all that somewhere along the line. So I kind of stuck with it. But I mean, look, to be quite honest, when it came time for me to leave WNA after 12 years, I was looking around for other jobs, and I just couldn't find one. Couldn't find one in industry that suited me. I couldn't find a part of the industry that wanted what I had.
Within the nuclear industry.
Within the actual sort of nuclear industry.
But you wanted to stick with it because you could have easily gotten a job outside the nuclear industry.
I guess so. I mean, it's what I know. I've got 12 years of this unique kind of knowledge. There are not many people who understand nuclear well enough to get the details right and can actually communicate well. So I'm one of them. So surely there's a role for me here. But I couldn't find one. So I had to create one by starting my own business. A business of being me called Fluent in Energy, where you can hire me to help your nuclear company do a bit better at communication.
And so tell me about some of the client. I mean, you have to give names, but like some of the projects you've been involved in, the types of clients. And
well, I'm still finding my feet because I started the company, like I said, like literally because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what other roles to give myself. So I can offer just basic communication services like interviewing, sort of thought leadership, blogging, and social media and things like that. So I've been doing that for certain clients to help them like up their game. And most of those are the ones who generally recognize nuclear must do more in communication. And they recognize that, I recognize that. And so we kind of partner to try to improve things. I'm kind of That's been okay, and that's basically paid the rent. I think what I'm going to kind of pivot towards is actually training for sort of a training offer to nuclear companies who want to do more in communication, and they aim for the larger ones. And my kind of approach is that I really think the individual humans of the nuclear sector need to level up and become better communicators themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I chat with Chris Kiefer a lot, who's got that Decouple podcast, brilliant guy, also from outside the industry, just
right. Another
one. I mean, it's just like, but listening to him is just such a breath of fresh air, and like hearing him interview, it's like he's got like he does the interviews I want to do, and like listening to him is like literally the greatest entertainment I've got. But him and I chat a little bit about like, okay, well, how can we rally up the human capital that the industry has, because it's not a small industry, right? It's 10% of global electricity. There's hundreds of power plants operating around the world, each that have, like not exactly, but close to 1,000 people. So you're just talking about like 1 million people that you could put to work as
1 million people, and they're smart people, right? They're
brilliant,
smartest people,
hardworking, dedicated,
all of them.
Yeah, everyone that I've met in the nuclear industry, whether or not I think they've got all the facts right, or the incentives of their organization are aligned with future growth of the industry, the people themselves, and that's been the most rewarding part about this job as well. The people themselves are amazing. I could have a beer with any of them, talk with any of them for hours. Like, they're good people. Like, every single one I've met is a good person.
They are genuine, aren't they? There are no kind of chances and liars or dishonorable people. I don't meet them anyway. So these are excellent people. They should be brilliant spokespersons. But obviously not all of them, not everybody is cut out for that, but among that 1 million, I'm sure that by getting them to represent nuclear like in a human way, with the human face, as themselves, with the same values and daily concerns as anybody else, I'm sure that can help to build support. And I think it's super important because nuclear is extremely resource efficient, isn't it? That's one of the big advantages. But the disadvantage of that is that it's actually kind of a small industry. Although it's 10% of global electricity, it's a lot smaller than you might think for that.
The relative proportion of people. Its greatest strength is one of its greatest weaknesses.
Nuclear is just like that all the way, isn't it? Like, everything you think is big turns out to be small, vice versa. It's always a challenge to communicate. So, I mean, I always say this factoid to try to prove my point, which is that the annual consumption of uranium is like 65,000 tons. That will fit on one ship. That's one Panamax ship. Not even a big ship by today's standards. Go on one ship. Compare that to the oil tankers in the world.
Oh, you're saying
more than one, right?
The number that you cite is the whole world's consumption on an annual basis.
All that nuclear fuel comes from 65,000 tons of uranium, and it's on one ship.
I know.
It's so that, the crew on that ship really need to start talking about what they're doing. Otherwise, who's going to even know they exist, right? So these days, you have to communicate continuously. Otherwise, you don't exist, right, in the modern world.
Yeah, I mean, it would be awesome if you could get a gig with one of these big utilities that has thousands of workers and literally figure out a way to kind of scale their voices, like hold lectures and seminars and develop educational materials, all to be able to enable them to make their voice heard in the public sphere. Because it doesn't take much. If you had like even 1,000 people consistently writing into politicians, consistently writing into journalists, and just saying, 1,000 people is not that much, but it can appear very large. I mean, the anti-nuclear people, they're really only like 5 of them. And, it's like, I can leave them on my hands, and yet they're able to have a huge voice. You think if you put 1,000 like actual nuclear industry workers, to work socially, that you'd wield just tremendous power. And you'd think that their parent organization would have an incentive in enabling them to do so.
You'd think so. And there's so much that organizations can do to just build alliances outside the nuclear sector, build alliances with other organizations out there in your region, which are not connected with energy, which don't ever think about nuclear power, but they have some kind of value alignment, or they're working on, they're concerned with similar sort of social issues, and just invest in that. Turn up and make friends with people. It's got to do it.
Yeah.
As well as like basic things like, why can power plants not invest to get every child in any given country to visit a nuclear power plant at least
They
once?
used to, and then they stopped. I mean, it drives me absolutely insane. It's like in France and Switzerland, I heard it used to be part of the school program is you take the school bus full of children to the local nuclear plant, you learn about energy, and then people grow up to love it, and they stop doing that. And I mean, I don't know, they probably can't do it in the US because the security regulations are just absolutely out of control. They make no sense. I mean, even for me, like it takes me an hour to like get past or more to get past security and to get into a nuclear facility. Imagine doing that with a school bus full of children. It would just be like a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, Russia has a good example. I mean, some of their plants are super remote, even by their standards. And so something that they've done is create visitor centers in the regional capitals.
Yeah, so cool.
So it's like a store and kind of, in a mall or something, and you go there and, they're really exciting presenters who tell you about energy. It's a great day out for school. But I mean, it's investment.
Yeah, it is investment.
But you have to take it seriously and put money into it. But if you don't do that, how are you going to keep your social license?
No, I know. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it also drives me crazy that the leadership of these organizations don't realize how much money you have and should be putting into marketing and communication. I mean, I don't know if this is true across the entire like utility sector, maybe not, but like in the technology sector and like products, it's like 20-30% of your budget is going to marketing. It's like that should be the industry standard.
And they don't even have our problems of all the imagery. They don't even have problems that people want their stuff already.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you hear the nuclear people, complaining about, oh, well, we don't have a social license and that. It's like,
well, I wonder why. I mean, I just wish we could take it as seriously as the operating licenses. It's absolutely right. If you don't have competence and the technical ability, your operating license, is at risk. So you've got to, and they will correctly take that away from you if you're not safe enough. That's absolutely right. So your social license is decaying continuously if you're not building relationships and maintaining, earning the trust that you need. It needs a serious program of investment. I don't know why that's hard to understand.
Yeah, though, as I say it, as I'm musing with you, I realize that I'm also afraid of what might happen if they do that, because I also think that the nuclear industry itself is to blame for the radiophobia. And so it's like if they set up all these information centers and all they do is talk about how like, microscopic amount of radiation is the worst thing in the world, then it might have the opposite effect that we want.
Yeah, that could happen. Let's not rush too quickly. Let's rush too quickly to do that. Yeah. I mean, I've heard stories about in some newcomer countries where they launch an education campaign, and it's all about radiation, and they just go to people who never thought about nuclear before in their lives, and they say, look, don't worry, radiation's not that bad. We're only going to let a little bit of it out.
Yeah, it's so funny. This reminds me of, and even big, like modern successful companies make like these classic mistakes. There was a Facebook ad, that was telling, like, they were spending their dollars, nationwide ad, talking about how much they value election security and how safe they're going to make their systems for election security. And I'm like, you guys are idiots. All you're doing, like, I understand that is a problem. You got brought in front of Congress for that. And yes, you're wrong for letting that happen. But by creating a marketing campaign that says you're going to solve it, all you did was just educate all of the people who like weren't reading the news vociferously that you are at blame for, you know, election security issues. Like you're literally advertising your greatest weaknesses.
Yeah, apparently there's a problem with security. I wasn't aware before. Thank you for the information.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the nuclear example, like I think some great research from Breakthrough Institute was done a few months ago, and they basically were saying that in most nuclear new build projects, the concerns of local people are not radiation or safety or nuclear scare stories. They're just worried that are local officials going to be corrupt? Can I trust the government to be my best? Which is the same stuff as any infrastructure project.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's so funny. I was just, who was I talking to? But we were talking about this project finance people. We're talking about the challenges with siting and like getting local community buy-in. And they were telling me about the horror stories around wind and solar, just dealing with the local community to get buy-in to place their facilities, and like what a nightmare it was and how it killed projects, and how there was like concerted effort, not just amongst the local people, but then the state legislatures to block solar and wind projects. And I'm like, oh my God, nuclear actually isn't special in that way. You're going to run into that for every industry.
Yeah. It seems like there's a kind of a threshold. Once you go over that, it'll start being against you, unless they realize that, you know, unless they realize the benefits.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time. So I want to let you have the last word. Anything that, you know, you care to share with our audience about your vision for the future of the industry, maybe?
I don't know. It was a vision for the future of the industry. It really is a mixed picture, and we never really know what's going to happen with the large scale technology that we have now, these large reactors. But the potential for there's excitement around offshore deployment of SMRs. And I really see that could.
What do you mean by offshore? Can you say that again?
Putting small reactors on like seagoing vessels or
you
barges.
Literally mean offshore, not just another country. You mean like in the water.
Oh yeah, actually in the water. Yeah. I mean, that seems to be something with the potential to really scale. So really scale, a potential game changer. So, I mean, not to highlight that technology as my very favorite or something like that, but that seems to be the main possibility for nuclear to actually get more than the current 10% of electricity of global electricity, which, let's remember, is only like 5% of global energy.
Yeah.
So I think the story of nuclear power is really of a massive opportunity missed. And I hope some of the opportunities coming will be able to seize them and make a difference. Something that I keep in mind is if my work helps one reactor operate for one more year, that more than makes up for any carbon I emit in my whole life. That's such a huge contribution. So the gains from the work we're doing trying to help nuclear are ginormous. So I encourage everybody else, keep going. Don't give up.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy Gordon, thank you so much for your time today. Always a pleasure talking. And the next time that we meet in person, you have to eat escargot with me. That is.
Okay. All right. I promise. Thanks. Thanks for the conversation, Brett. It's been great.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.